Good afternoon, Cherries fans, and welcome to this latest show here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Now, we do wish it was in better circumstances, but of course, yesterday we was beaten 3-0 up at Goodison Park with mistakes at the back, no impetus in attack. What's going to happen to Iraola? Do we want Gary back? That is the question. See what I did there? We do want to discuss, though, Everton and Sean Dyche. What sort of team are they? Why, and how did they get the better on Iraola? What do Everton fans think of the style last season compared to what they saw yesterday? And what happens to Iraola now? We do have a very, very special guest to discuss all of these points, and it is a pleasure to welcome on from BBC Radio Merseyside, Giulia Bould. Good afternoon, Giulia. How are you doing?
I'm very well, probably a little bit better than you are after that result from Goodison, but yeah, all good. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, and to you as well. And of course, you are one of the leading presenters from BBC Radio Merseyside, aren't you? Tell us a little bit about your role.
So I present the Total Sport Merseyside show on a Wednesday, and I'm one of the sport reporters. So anyone in these parts that listens will hear me at the press conferences. So we cover Liverpool, Everton, and Tranmere quite largely, really. And we've got the rugby here, big rugby area around Merseyside, because St Helens and Warrington and Widnes, and sort of any bits of sport really that I can get to do. And it is largely football, but that's great. That suits me as well.
Excellent stuff. Well, you was there yesterday, and you was there last game of the season when Everton secured safety. Let's go back a little bit further, though, because Everton are a club that, back in the late 90s was struggling, had that resurgence under David Moyes, got into the Champions League. They kind of dipped off again, then picked up under Ancelotti. And since then, Farhad Moshiri come in and spent all this money promising the world to Everton fans. And let's be honest, the sort of money that Everton was spending, if it was spent wisely, you could say that it was comparable to Manchester City. But it's all fallen apart. What is your view of what's happened?
Yeah. How long have you got, really? Because this is, such an in-depth thing, which we've covered quite a lot. And there's now a process of a takeover underway at Everton as well. So, just rewinding back then, I think David Moyes built a side that was known for being really tough, qualified for Champions League football. And there was the infamous Merseyside row as well, because Liverpool had won the Champions League and didn't finish in the top four. And I think the rule book had to be brought out, and I think rules were changed after that. It felt like Everton were going in the right direction, but I do think they sort of came stuck. Moyes always he said there was a bit of a glass ceiling that they could never, ever go through. Roberto Martinez came in and got the record Premier League points tally on his first season. So it looked like he'd kind of dispelled that myth that, nothing could be done to break into it. Unfortunately, I think, and if any Everton fan was sat here talking to you now, they'd say it's been the running of the club that has been the issue. Yes, Farhad Moshiri came in as a majority shareholder and has slowly built it up. He has spent money. You're quite right to say, there's a beautiful looking brand new stadium. It looks like a stadium now. For quite a while, it just looked like a great big hole and nothing. But now it looks like a stadium on the waterfront. If anyone comes to Liverpool, it's a bit further down from the Albert Dock. But, it looks absolutely incredible. Money's been spent. Around about £500 million has been spent during his tenure. So that can't be levelled at him. But unfortunately, it's always been square pegs and round holes. It hasn't ever been spent in the correct way. And now there is, a situation where the money has stopped and players are being sold off. Richarlison was sold off, and it was fairly open, so the FFP wasn't breached. It was on the final day of June in order to ensure that there was no FFP issues. Anthony Gordon was sold for big money. Nobody came in that January either. And if you look back to that situation in January, there were several teams, as you well know, fighting it out in a relegation battle, and Everton were the only ones who didn't sign a single player in January to bolster the squad. So Sean Dyche came in, Frank Lampard was sacked, and Dyche has really had a very tiny squad to work with. And I think it was more miraculous what he did to keep Everton up last season than what Lampard did the season before, because he had a much bigger and better squad. It still wasn't big enough, but he definitely had players at his disposal to turn it around. Yeah, so as it stands at the moment at Everton, the fan base has been desperately unhappy. There were protests from February onwards last season. In fact, Sean Dyche has never knew last season a game without a protest before against the running of the club, because they started on his first game, which was against Arsenal. And then ironically, Everton beat Arsenal, who were top of the table at the time. So that's just typical football. Many of the board, 3 members of the board left in the summer. There is an interim board in place right now. 777 have come in. They were at the game yesterday. They were at the game against Luton. So they're showing their faces. But as you know, a takeover can't just happen overnight. It's got to go to the Financial Conduct Authority. The Premier League has to ratify it, the fit and proper persons test, all that kind of stuff's going on. So they reckon about 8 to 12 weeks. So it could take us up to Christmas, that. 777, if people don't know, they own lots of different clubs. Genoa is one, Red Star Belgrade is another. They have shares in Hertha Berlin as well. There's all kinds of stories. As the internet, you can Google whatever you want. You can find positives and negatives. So it'd be interesting. They did do a really long piece in the programme yesterday, and it went out as an email to all fans as well from 777 about what they want to do, why they want to be involved in Everton. And it reads really, really well. I just think everyone was so excited when Moshiri came on board. It was finally, a wealthy person to own Everton and restore it to where it rightfully should be. It's an icon of English football, isn't it? Everton, Goodison Park.
Definitely.
Famous. It's a beautiful stadium, and it'd be a really sad day when all the doors shut on that, and tears will be shed without a shadow of a doubt. Unfortunately, the money was never spent right. I mean, it's been a revolving door of managers, and no one's really known the plan, I think. I mean, Marco Silva, a young up-and-coming manager who's done really well since he's gone to Fulham, didn't work for him. Ronald Koeman, a legend when he was playing, came in, didn't work with him. Even towards the end of Carlo Ancelotti's tenure, the results had kind of begun to dip pretty quickly. Rafa Benitez crossed the park. That was never going to work, ever, because it's never, ever, going to be accepted, and it didn't last very long. Sam Allardyce has been in. Roberto Martinez has been in. Big Dunk's had a couple of spells. Frank Lampard came in. I mean, you name it, Everton have tried it, but I think sometimes you have to make a plan and stick with it, don't you? But that hasn't been the case. Dyche is in. I'll tell you now, I'm a big fan of Dyche. I think he's great. But it's a very precarious situation at Everton still.
I think one of the things that I've always thought, and I've heard murmurings from the Everton faithful, that Everton fans are not happy with Bill Kenwright. Now, Bill Kenwright, of course, saved the club all those years ago. Was it about 2004, if I'm right in thinking?
Yeah, I'm trying to wind that back. I think it was before then, wasn't it? Actually.
Yeah, it might have well have been. But it feels that what Farhad Moshiri did was gave Bill Kenwright effectively the keys to actually do what he wanted to. And he hasn't spent that money correctly. Do you see Bill Kenwright being part of the club moving forward, or do you think the fans are going to get their way and get rid of?
That is the $1 million question at the moment. There are some fans that will, stand by Bill Kenwright for what he's done at the club, and that's fine. There is a huge portion of the fan base that do want him to go, and that's why it was interesting in the summer when there was the breaking news about the board. The fans were protesting, not against the results at the end of last season. It was all about the running of the club, the way the board was running the club, and decisions that were being made. That was the issue. So they were very clever, the Everton fans, in that the protest was always before the game, and then they go in and take the seats and get behind the team. So there was quite a clear distinction. But of course, the board weren't actually at any games from January onwards anyway, because the club said there were some perceived threats towards them, so they weren't at the games either. It was interesting in the summer, though. Denise Barrett-Baxendale, who was the CEO of Everton, left. Grant Ingles was the finance director, was a member of the board, left. And Graham Sharp, of course, a club legend who had an advisory role really on the board, he left. The only one left was Bill Kenwright.
Yeah.
He remains on an interim board right now. He's not been going to games. He's not been at any games this season. It will be interesting. I would think for a PR purpose, 777 could look at it that we need a full change. I think for Bill Kenwright, he's always seen it that it's his club. He's a boyhood fan, and I think he would want to remain, whether or not it might be in, like a presidential role. You get those presidential roles, don't you? Maybe it'd be something in that. I think for quite a lot of the fans, though, they would want to see not only an end to the Moshiri era, but also the Bill Kenwright era. And I think that's maybe, you would imagine 777. They've got to be looking at the PR around this, surely. And you'd think there's been a discussion. But as yet, we're all in limbo. Nobody knows the situation. I've asked the club when I've been covering it at work. And no, we don't know what the board makeup's going to be. All I've been told is there will be new faces coming into the board, but no one could confirm or deny if some would be leaving.
It's a shame because, as you say, he is a boyhood fan of Everton. And I think, there's no doubt that he's done his very best, or his intentions have always been good. But of course, like all human beings, get it wrong. And we wouldn't be having this conversation if it all went right, would we really?
No, not at all. And football is a business at the end of the day. And any business, whether you're Marks and Spencer's, whether you're the corner shop or a football club, sometimes you make a decision and it doesn't work out. It's the same as, sometimes you sign a player and they might have all the stats going for them and you think this is it, this is the player that's going to turn around. And they just don't work at all. And all that money, is being spent. So, I don't think it's been for the want of trying at Everton. I mean, there was the infamous summer under Ronald Koeman where it felt like about 30 number 10s were bought for the team. Just money was being spent left, right and centre. Wayne Rooney came back, which I don't really think was the best idea. But, a legend came back. But there was a real big buzz around the club. Everton were finally spending and, attracting players and people were to come and a legend had returned. But again, it resulted in sort of, no trophies. And that's the issue. It's 28 years, since a trophy. And fans have just seen, especially with the likes of Newcastle now, and, they've got a colossal amount of money behind them, but they're in the Champions League. And as long as you're winning, unfortunately, football fans, as long as you're winning and as long as you're doing well, nobody's really questioning how much money's being spent. But, questions arise when it's not going well, and that's when people start dissecting everything and asking who's made that decision? Why was that money spent? And that's been the situation at Everton for a very long time. And, it's not for the want of trying. There's a lot of good staff that work there that want to turn it around and they want to see that club right at the back, top fighting out for titles and trophies again. But it's just been nowhere near, has it? And the last couple of seasons have been draining, really draining. And I think the fans are just exhausted by it now, to be honest.
Of course, you have to go all the way back to 1995 for the last trophy, the FA Cup final against Man United. It was a 1-0 win. Paul Rideout, wasn't it, that scored the goal?
I think so. You're testing my knowledge here. I'm full of a cold and I'm not long been out of bed. Yeah, it was a long day yesterday. But yes, FA Cup was the last one, I think. Yep. And obviously everyone harps back to the 80s as well, the 84-85 season where Everton were, pretty much the best there was. And Merseyside was the sort of the football mecca, wasn't it, of the UK? Like it was, Liverpool and Everton in finals taking each other on and fighting out for titles and stuff. And, that doesn't help either when, Blues have looked over the other side of the park and seen success there. There was a barren spell for Liverpool for a little bit, not as much really. I mean, there were still cups, but finally got a Premier League title, and it's a sad time for Everton. But I do think that's what concerns me now. Although yesterday, did you go to the game yesterday? Did you travel? I mean, Goodison was bouncing again yesterday, and I don't know if anyone saw there was a picture went out on Everton's social media of a fancy watch that detects the noise, and it said it was over 100 decibels. So when I think a plane is about 120 decibels taken off, isn't it? I mean, it was loud in there, and it was loud. The last game of the season, I think, is one I will never ever forget ever. It was incredible atmosphere in there. And yeah, what I found interesting with you, which I'm sure we'll talk about, is it felt two very different Bournemouths. I mean, I'll be honest, I don't watch you closely week in, week out, but the Bournemouth side that came in May, that felt really different to yesterday's one.
And that is actually something we'll come on to in a bit. But what I want to do is get a bit of an understanding of Sean Dyche as well, because of course, Sean was at Burnley for many years, and I think personally he did a fantastic job with Burnley. Got them back into the Premier League, kept them there for so long. But he played this style that was anti-football, everything wrong with football. You know, people used to hate it. And I remember a game where literally, well, we were in complete control. Sean Dyche, it was just straight down the other end and scored. And of course, don't mention the defeat up at Burnley as well, which was where we equalised, and then the referee pulled it all the way back for a Burnley penalty. But Sean Dyche has got this style of play that's kind of been given, or it's kind of stuck with him, at Burnley. But
Yeah.
is he deviating away from that at Everton, or what's he kind of doing?
I think what you're trying to say that he's a bit Marmite, isn't he, Sean
Yeah,
Dyche?
he is.
You either
Yeah,
love him or you hate him.
Yeah, his style's
But
a bit Marmite. He doesn't like Bournemouth. Well, that's what we believe. But
do you know what? I mean, as I said before, I like
yeah,
Sean Dyche. I think he's
yeah,
got a very dry sense of humour, and I think sometimes people don't always get him, but I quite like that. I think he's quite funny. Everton, it's been difficult for him to get any style of play because he was hit with the worst amount of injuries on a tiny, tiny squad as it was. I mean, at the end of the season, I think, he had no Dominic Calvert-Lewin for the majority of his games. He had no recognised striker. That meant because there was no cover for DCL once he was out. He had his captain, Seamus Coleman, was injured and out. And, it was literally square pegs in round holes. Whoever could play was playing. I think he had, a couple of keepers on the bench by the end of the season. There was kids out the under 21s that were never even coming on. And he was questioned. I asked him in a press conference once about, when it was the Leicester game last season and it was 2-2 and I think there was about 4 games left then. Leicester fighting it out as well. And apart from the substitute he made because of Seamus Coleman's injury, he didn't make any subs. And a lot of the fans were saying, why didn't he make any subs? And, and he politely, in a roundabout way, because there isn't anything on the bench. So that shows you how little he's got. He's coming for criticism this season because he's talked a lot about XG. And a lot of people will know about the XG, expected goals. Yeah. And he's been using that. He's very stat-based. He's very into his research. He's very into his sports psychology. And I find that quite fascinating. And if you talk to him, he's always in the middle. He's never here. He's never there. After yesterday, he wasn't bouncing off the ceiling, jumping up and down. But the same as after being beaten by Luton at home the week before, again, he wasn't on the floor. He wasn't depressed. It was just always the same. And I think that's maybe what's needed because confidence has been tricky at Everton and, fighting constant relegation battles for so long has been quite draining. So I think he's just taken the emotion out of it, which works. Yeah. The XG thing upset a lot of people because they said, what's the point of having XG and all these stats if the goals aren't going in the back of the net? And they weren't. And, it wasn't for the fact that they weren't good performances. Fulham on the first game of the season at home should have probably won it. Didn't.
Yeah.
Wolves, same situation. Should have won it. Didn't. Arsenal in the game probably until Arsenal scored and then kind of went to pieces. And Luton again should have had a couple of goals before Luton got into it, and it was just 2 set pieces that undid Everton yet again. But I think he was vindicated a little bit yesterday, and there was a cheeky tweet from Everton where they retweeted the XG of I think it was Jack Harrison yesterday and said, "Oh look, it does work." It did feel like it was coming, but yeah, I mean, what more can Sean Dyche do? He can't stand there and put the goal in the back of the net for them. I think the players seem to like him. I don't think he's lost the dressing room.
No.
But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's harder for English managers. I always wonder this. Is it harder for an English manager? And Dyche has said to me, he goes, I've got a gruff voice. I'm a skinhead. And I know people don't particularly think I'm like Pep Guardiola, but he goes, I use a lot of the similar stats and go about my way, but people don't see that. And I think it is trickier for English managers. I don't think they're seen as sort of fancy, are they? I don't know. I think that's kind of a perception of an English manager. We think, oh, they're quite old-fashioned. But you bring somebody in with a fancy foreign name, and everyone goes, oh, they know what they're doing. So I think it's probably a bit of that. I like him. I hope he stays around for a while. I think what he did last season was incredible, considering how bad it was. And results just were not happening whatsoever. Yeah, but I get what you mean. He's a bit Marmite. But yeah, and also you're not going to like him anyway because he's got a really good record against Bournemouth. So
well, exactly. To be honest, that's probably half of it. To be fair, to be honest, he's a very, very good, solid manager. He gets the best out of teams where the teams are probably limited, and I think that's probably where I'm going to go on to next, because before we discuss yesterday's game and what happens with our foreign fancy sounding named manager, let's look at last season for Bournemouth. And of course, Gary O'Neill, who is now Wolves manager, recently got a victory against Manchester City.
Yeah.
But that last game of the season last year, personally, I think it was a bit of a strange one. What was your feelings about Gary O'Neill? Firstly, from what he had done prior to that game to keep us in the Premier League, which was always going to be a tough job, considering, of course, across the park, the other team that do play in red beat us 9-0. Scott Parker, after that, got sacked.
Yeah.
Walking out of Anfield that day, and I was there, I said that we had no chance. I wouldn't turn around and say that, publicly, but, I was talking to the people that I was with and I said, got no chance of staying up. And Gary O'Neill did that. I think he was on the beach that last game of the season, but
that's interesting you say that, because everyone at Goodison that day thought, to answer your question firstly, yes, I thought he did a fantastic job. And to pick players up after some, poor results as well. That's part of it. It's that sports psychology side, isn't it? I think from this side, from over here in Merseyside, everybody thought maybe that final game would have been a straight shootout, actually. And whoever won would stay up. When everyone was looking at, you try and work out the fixtures, don't you? Like, well, you might get something on that, and they might get something on that, and you're working it all out in your head. Like,
I could only envisage that last game of the season being just that shootout, as you say. But it wasn't, and we didn't have anything riding on it. But
and he did a great job, because I just remember the desperation in these parts of, well, if there's 6 teams in the relegation fight, that helps. And then it was 5 teams and then 4 teams by the end of it. But to get Bournemouth out of it and to be comfortable at the, that must have been a lovely, lovely feeling to have been comfortable at the end of last season, because it was not comfortable sat in the stands at Goodison. So I was really surprised from being here and just seeing what had gone on at Bournemouth. I was really shocked that he's now not the Bournemouth manager. So I was surprised, because for me, he seemed to do a fantastic job. And also, you say he was on the beach that last game. That's not the perception here at all. I was sat in the stands watching that, and I thought, oh my goodness me, Bournemouth have come here for the win, and this is not going to be good. And obviously at half time it was 0-0, and the other results meant Leicester were staying up, Everton were in the bottom 3. And I thought Bournemouth put on an absolute, to say there was nothing riding on it. And I thought, wow, he's got everybody playing really well. They obviously like the manager. They like playing for him. So, it came as a massive surprise, having seen that game at Goodison, that he then wasn't there a matter of weeks later. You'll know a lot more than I am. But, it was fascinating, that to me, because I thought Bournemouth looked really good for nothing to play for, and to put in a performance like that and made it tough. And Dyche said that to me afterwards. He was like, they came here to play. And there was no flip-flops on, as they say, at all.
No, fair enough. It seemed to be the perception with the Bournemouth fans. But of course, towards the end of the season, after getting that vital victory against Leeds, which kept us up, we then lost the next 4. And in that run, there was some pretty dire games. But one thing that, actually resonates from what you said about Sean Dyche and what I know of Gary O'Neill, and I've met Gary, and he's very, very articulate. again, he's very stat driven. He'll assess the teams. I actually met him before the Brentford game at home, and it was a case of, if Brentford do this, we do this to combat them. And I really liked his style. He's not one of those managers, and you probably agree with me that Dyche isn't either. He's not one of those managers that you'll go, oh, he's an exciting person. He's not the sort of manager that you probably invite to a party. But
I don't know. Maybe it says more about me. I would definitely invite Dyche to a party, because I think he'd be quite a lot of fun.
do you know what? I think probably letting his hair down. Well,
he's big into his music. He's massive into his music.
Yeah.
So if you needed a DJ, he could sort your playlist out for a party, no problem.
You know what? That would be absolute quality. If the video actually surfaced of Sean Dyche on the DJ decks, that would be brilliant.
Had a few of them at Everton. I think Sam Allardyce was caught at a disco somewhere, and Roberto Martinez was caught at a concert doing big wheels, big bus, little bus. I think it was the dance moves. Never lived it down. Can't see Sean Dyche. He went to Glasgow though. He
Did he?
He was pictured, but I can't see him being a dancer. I don't think so. Anyway, I'll ask him and I'll find out.
Yeah, you've got to let us know the actual answer on that as well. And see if for Gary O'Neill as well, because I'm pretty sure I think they get on quite well actually.
Yeah.
It'll be quite interesting to Gary O'Neill's got a secret side as well. I'll tell you what, let's move on to this decision that was made during the summer for Bournemouth. So we've got rid of Gary O'Neill. My initial thought was, why have we done that? But then we brought in Andoni Iraola, because the people being mentioned were Frank Lampard, of course, who was at Everton, Steven Gerrard, of course, recently left Aston Villa, and Jesse Marsh, who, of course, did a very good job at Leeds, not. But one thing that, as soon as Iraola was mentioned, was like, okay, I know a bit about this man. He was at Rayo Vallecano. Played a very, very attractive style of football. Can see why we've done it. The problem is he hasn't been able to transition his style of play, which is a passing, possession-based play with a high press, onto these players. And my concern now, and do let me know if you agree, but when managers, international managers come over to the Premier League, there is that, it's completely different from Spain. It's completely different from Germany. It's completely different from any other league in the world, isn't it?
Yeah. If you play in the howling winds in the middle of January on a Tuesday night or something, completely different. But yeah, I agree. I sometimes don't think you can play pretty football in the Premier League. It's so physical. There's such talent, the pace of it. I did think what was interesting, and again, I could be completely wrong, and I'm basing this on what I saw yesterday.
Yeah.
I don't know. Bournemouth looked a lot slower than they did last season. That I saw. I don't know. Maybe that was just a one-off, so you can correct me on that. It didn't feel as free-flowing. I mean, obviously the defence had an absolute nightmare, and really probably it should have been more. I think that was the only thing. If you're going to be disappointed as an Everton fan, I think DCL had one, or if it had been on a tiny bit lower on the crossbar, would have been in. I think he had a couple of chances. Decore could have had another one. Anana could have had 2 goals. Jack Harrison could have had another one. It was more for not hitting the target that Everton weren't up, rather than anything that Bournemouth did. It looked like he didn't change anything. I don't know. I just felt watching it. He looked. Your manager's set you up as if he'd never been to he's clearly never been to Goodison, but as if he didn't know anything about the atmosphere at Goodison, what it's like. Everyone's on top of the pitch. It's loud. It is, the crowd will get into you and they'll get the players up for it. And there's the siren that goes off before Z cars, and the noise in there yesterday was fantastic. He just looked like he didn't know what Goodison was about, and he wasn't prepared for it. I don't know what you think. I don't know if I've just made that up, but that's how it came across to me. And there wasn't really any immediate changes where he thought, oh, hang on, this is quite a fiery place, this. But he just seemed very, like he hadn't done any research on what it's like to go to Everton.
I completely agree. And I don't think he had really done, and it did, well, he probably did, but it didn't come across that he'd done much research on Everton. that it is going to be tough, because we played again like we did against Arsenal, like we did against Brighton, and to be fair, against Chelsea it worked, where it was this possession-based passing football. Now, if you're going to pass the ball around and, as we saw, come out from the back like Zabania did when he lost it to James Garner, you're asking for trouble. And that is the sort of things that we've been doing this season. That's the sort of errors. But of course, because of that passing style, we haven't got that speed, that impetus up front to get the ball to Solanke. Phil Billing, for example, has completely lost his way under the manager, and he's not playing that 10 role. He's playing too far back because it is this passing style. We're trying to effectively pass the ball into the back of the net, and it doesn't work in this division.
No, and it's not going to happen at Goodison either.
No, of all places.
With the Sean Dyche side as well,
Yeah.
is organised about just being a menace and getting into people and flying a tackle in. And I mean, I thought Jared Branthwaite for Everton had a superb game at the back. He wasn't going to let anything get past him, and he put some really fiery tackles in a few times. In fact, quite a few of Everton's players did. But yeah, it seemed to wilt Bournemouth rather than get them up for a fight and galvanise them. I don't know. It felt like, as you say, trying to pass it. You can't be pretty. You can't come to Goodison and play pretty football unless, I don't know, maybe Haaland or something. He can probably play. But that's a very different game. But most teams can't come. You're going to come and have to fight. If you want to win, you're going to have to fight, and that's been the upset. That sometimes it's Everton that have let sides win rather than they've come and been good, and that's been the huge row. So I'm from someone who is clearly not a Bournemouth fan and he's from outside and just watching bits of it. I am staggered that there was a managerial change now because, I thought came to Goodison with nothing to play for in May and was superb, and then yesterday I thought, really? And I know there'd been a bit of bravado before, hadn't there, about this game will decide the rest of our season. I think was that the quote from the manager?
Yeah, it was a case that and a lot of Bournemouth fans have thought this, and a lot of Bournemouth fans were completely against Gary O'Neill. They were totally against it, and some of the criticism, some of the abuse that Gary O'Neill received, like clown pictures, and even worse, PE teacher was one thing that he was referred to, was completely and utterly unfair. But Andoni Iraola was basically trying to say that our season starts at Goodison Park, and because we've had this hard start. But I don't think that there's been errors that were in the Brighton game, which then led into Arsenal, which then led into yesterday. And in fact, things just seem to be getting worse. They don't seem to be getting better.
Yeah, I mean, you'll know more than I know. As I say, I'm not going to even pretend to say that I'm watching, Bournemouth that closely week in, week out. It's obviously not what I cover for work.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of things to watch. But it just felt night and day to me, those two Bournemouth sides. And that I feel quite sad that Gary O'Neill was not massively popular because he seemed, quite together and the job he did, surely. I mean, it's not. And I mean this with the greatest respect because I think it's like a lot of sides now. It's not world-beating players in the squads because they're just so expensive. There's not very many sides that can afford them, and they'll either go and play, for the big bucks either here or Spain or Real Madrid or Barcelona or something like that. So that's not, being derogatory in the slightest. But yesterday felt. I mean, I'd be worried if that was the performance week in, week out for Bournemouth because it didn't see. I know there was a lot of substitutions, but it didn't seem to change anything. It didn't seem to alter. And near the end, you almost, you had a couple of attempts. I think Dwight McNeil blocked one. But instantly, he went straight up the other side of the pitch and there was no one there. There seemed to be so many Everton players unmarked yesterday. And it felt a little bit like maybe the homework hadn't been done. Yes, Everton's home form on results has been poor up to that point without a win at home. But actually the performances weren't bad. You know, to not, I think there was one point where Decore wasn't being marked, Jack Harrison wasn't being marked. I think DCL was pretty much unmarked as well. And you've got Dwight McNeil running with the ball. And I just thought, if you're a Bournemouth fan, you must be really unhappy with that, because all those players are well known for being attack minded.
Yeah. And
I feel like I might have depressed you there slightly.
No, to be honest, it's a fair point, because my next thought is that, you know, because I called this game, you know, I called what was going to happen, and I don't
Did you?
profess to be
Not
a
many at
know-it-all.
Goodison did. Everyone was terrified.
To be honest, I said it was going to be 2-1, but I could see what Iraola was going to do. He was going to play this possession-based football, try to, you know, start quite well. And to be honest, in the first 15 minutes, apart from the error, we looked fairly decent. And then, of course, things started to unravel. And Sean Dyche was always going to hit us on the break. And we just seemed devoid of confidence. How long, you know, do we have to, or how long do you think Bournemouth need to stick by Iraola? Is it a case that now, you know, that's no wins in 8, and things only seem to be getting worse? The players don't seem to be able to play his style of football. He's a really nice man, but really nice men don't get you results. If you finish in the bottom 3, it doesn't matter if you've got, you know, Iraola or Neil Warnock as your manager. You're going down. But how long do you think we have to give this manager, considering it's not working?
Yeah, I feel bad answering this because, it's not a team I cover. So I don't want to upset anybody. And yeah, and as you say, you can be a nice person in football, but it doesn't mean you're going to succeed. Unfortunately, there's been a lot of nice managers through the door at Everton. Frank Lampard was a really good guy. You know, he was a really nice fella. His coaching staff were all really good. They bought into it. They adored being around here and loved the people, but it just didn't work out. And that's not to say, by the way, Sean Dyche isn't a nice person. So I just want to put that in there as well. Little asterisk. I mean, an international break always feels good for a reset, doesn't it? Always feels a good time to look at something. Speaking completely selfishly, I really don't want to go through that a third time with Everton. Stick with him. However, as you say, I think his style of play doesn't suit Bournemouth or the Premier League or the situation that Bournemouth are going to be in again. And that's, you know, Everton are highly likely to be in it again, you know, battling, just trying to grab the points, snatch the points wherever you possibly can and grind out results. It'll be interesting because is it Wolves next after the international break?
It is, it is.
That to me feels a massive storm brewing, doesn't it? You know, you're going head to head with the guy that was deemed not good enough.
Yeah.
And should he take the 3 points off you? I think then it becomes untenable, doesn't it? I think at that stage. But is it better to do it while there is a break and someone can come in and work with the players a little bit? Dyche had that when he came in because it was an FA Cup weekend and Everton were already out. So actually he had a good sort of nearly 2 weeks before his first game against Arsenal. And I think that worked wonders because fitness-wise, he felt the players weren't up to scratch and he put them through all the bleep tests and there was lots of videos of players throwing up and stuff like that. And he loves all that kind of stuff. But yeah, you might get a manager in next who goes, actually, I need more time. So I don't know. I feel really mean answering this because I feel like I'm not qualified and shouldn't really have an opinion on this. For me, I think the Wolves game's key. If they're going to do it, they'll do it now. Surely they'd have done it today, would they? I don't know. Do they? They seem to work pretty fast, Bournemouth, because I think wasn't the manager in place immediately. Whereas Everton, it was like a week and a half or something.
Literally, it was a strange one. So when Scott Parker was sacked, Gary O'Neill was interim all the way up to the World Cup and then got the job full time. In this case, and of course, Bill Foley taking on the reins now, and this is a Bill Foley appointment in my eyes, it was a case that Gary was sacked, you know, early in the morning. I think it was about 11 o'clock. And I was doing a live show at the time and, you know, I hadn't really prepared it very well. So it was probably just an hour afterwards. And then during that, Iraola was appointed. So that's how quick it was. I think personally, Gary, even back when he got given the job, was probably a dead man walking. And why I
Yeah.
say that is that the players that we signed, because Gary nor Iraola have actually got the reins on the players we actually bringing through the door. And that'd be quite interesting to ask you about that and how that works at Everton, because those players seem to be players for Iraola. They didn't seem to be Gary O'Neill type players. They seem to be Iraola players. And I honestly thought it was going to work. I thought when Iraola come in, the passing style, was going to work. Against West Ham, we looked good, but it's just completely unravelled. Teams have worked him out quite quickly and known how to play against Bournemouth. But how does it work at Everton? Is it a case where Sean Dyche can make his own signings, or is it a case that it's being made by the board?
Well, there is a director of football, which is Kevin
Mhm.
Thelwell, and he's across all elements of Everton. So whether it be the first team, the women's team, the academy, he's across kind of all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And he's a good guy. He works long, long hours. He's told me,
Mhm.
I don't really think he ever gets a holiday. It's interesting because, as I think I said earlier, Sean Dyche came in a couple of days before the transfer window ended in January,
Yeah.
and there were no signings at all. So he didn't get anything that was his.
Mhm.
He did know some of the players because there's Tarky there and Dwight McNeil.
Yeah.
He knew from Burnley. Michael Keane he knew as well. So he did have some players that he kind of knew. But essentially, to stay up in the Premier League, as Sean Dyche did, he did it with an amalgamation of I'm going right back to Seamus Coleman's been there the longest. So he was signed by David Moyes. So if
Yeah.
you go that way across the squad, it's a squad of 9 different managers now,
Mhm.
which is, you think, well, that's never going to work, is it? Because they were all very different styles. They were not, no one was David Moyes, incredibly different to a Ronald Koeman, Carlo Ancelotti, very
Yeah.
different to a Frank Lampard. They're all completely different. I mean, Sean Dyche works alongside Kevin Thelwell, so there were some signings this summer. Obviously, Jack Harrison is one he's now proved incredibly popular. He played for the under-21s a couple of weeks ago. He did half a game and looked absolutely outstanding. But I don't think you can ever really tell because it's like a man against boys, isn't it? Some of them were
Yeah.
really young, but he looked fantastic, and then he's come in and done really well. So he's a crowd favourite already. I can see why Everton were desperate to get him from Leeds on loan. It just feels better. He's obviously a signing, and now DCL's fit. He's sort of become a bit of a bit part player. He's coming on at the end of games. Because Dominic Calvert-Lewin, if you can keep him firing and keep him fit, then he's your first choice anyway.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But yeah, it's a bit of an odd one with Dyche because he's still working with a lot of players that are not his, and I don't think some of them he would have if he could get around it. I mean, Pickford picks himself, doesn't he? England's number one. I don't understand. I don't know what your thoughts are on Jordan Pickford. I cannot understand why people still query why he is the England number one.
I think, to be honest, down here, it is probably because we've got such an affiliation with Aaron Ramsdale that, we always say, oh, yeah, Aaron Ramsdale, great goalkeeper. But Jordan Pickford hasn't really done anything wrong, has he? Let's be honest.
Not for England, not at all. And he hasn't really done a lot wrong for it. I mean, there was the Bournemouth game at the end of the season, of course, which was crucial. Win and stay up. It was as simple as that. And the noise when Doucouré's goal went in was, I've heard Goodison rowdy and loud and crazy, but I think the stands were shaking and everything. It was absolutely insane. But you could say Jordan Pickford was the one that did it because to save that penalty in the Leicester game to get the point was key. And that was a huge, huge moment for him to do that. And he's never swayed from Everton at all. His loyalty seems to be there. He loves playing at Goodison. He has one of the boxes. His family have a box there, and his whole family goes to every single game. So he seems, very much part of it. So I think Dyche is completely happy with his keeper. There's not an issue. He signed a long-term deal as well. Probably more for insurance, but just in case somebody comes in with a big dip. But yeah, he seems very happy. I think Dyche would make a lot of changes if he could, but it's the money, and that's essentially how it is at Everton. There isn't much money to play with. that's not a secret. It's fairly open now that, you know, any deals that are being done. I don't think Beto hasn't been paid for up front either. No money's due until the end of the season. You know, loans, it's kind of working in the loan market. Dyche is looking at the younger members of the club. So he just goes to under 21 games and has a look. Lewis Dobbin has kind of stepped up as well. He's a relatively young player. Danjuma, of course, the infamous Danjuma, who was almost the big January signing and then decided after a tour round and given his word that he was coming, he went to Spurs and it didn't really work out. But then he didn't even get on yesterday, did he, Danjuma? So no. I think he's going to struggle. I mean, I think he's got some key players he will always rely on, as Dyche. But in an ideal world, he'd have a heck of a lot more money. But whoever comes in, even if they decided to get rid of Dyche, doesn't change the financial situation. So it'd be interesting what happens with this takeover. I don't think, though, it's going to bring with it a giant pot of cash to go and spend, you know, millions and millions and millions on a whole new starting 11. And I don't think you change some of them anyway. But yeah, I think it's been a learning curve for Sean Dyche. That's for sure.
Well, we need to, of course, win a game. But the last time Everton did win a game was against Brentford. And I thought you were fantastic. I really did. I watched that on TV and it was an outstanding performance against a very, very good team. And then you went and got beat by Luton. Where do you go from here this season? You know, is it a case that Sean Dyche continues with that because you got your first home win now, you know, which should hopefully breed confidence into the side, but where do you go from here? Because sure, avoiding relegation is still the priority, isn't it?
Oh, completely. Yeah. And Everton fans will not be calm until that is secured. Do you know what? Yeah. A relatively dull season, finishing maybe 11th with nothing to play for on the last few games would seem like an absolute holiday to a lot of Everton fans right now because it has been, it's just been exhausting, to be honest. A couple of seasons like that, you know, and Everton fans know that, you know, 33 minutes, well, plus 10 added. So 43 minutes away from going down. That's how close it was last season. And, you know, there was the bus welcomes under Frank Lampard, which I think they were on the TV everywhere. Yeah. Everton fans did anything and everything they could possibly think of. There was a game against Newcastle towards the end of last season, which ended badly. But, you know, they reinstated the bus then because Sean Dyche has them driving. So for one game, he allowed them on the bus to see if that would work again. There was a bagpiper going up Goodison Road playing Z cars. There were flares going off. Somebody, I don't know who, paid for what looked like industrial fireworks for outside the stadium for when the players were coming out and they were going off over the top of the stadium. Yeah. You know, Everton fans have done anything and everything. They were an absolute superb fan base that, you know, I think sometimes I know I've spoken to Dwight McNeil about it. He was with Burnley, obviously, when Burnley went down, and he said he remembers going to Goodison and thinking, "Oh my God, these fans are doing all the dark arts to help." And you know, it is really you know. And he just said, "Never seen anything like it." And a lot of the players now still talk about those bus welcomes under Frank Lampard when it was desperate for points, and they just said, we'd never seen anything like it. And, you know, they'd then begun organising, seeing them off from away trips from the training ground, and they'd have a full thing of the, you know, and these players, you know, Frank Lampard on the seat at the front, you know, where a tour guide would sit, and he's waving out the window and high-fiving it, you know, and it just kind of created something to try and get behind. Similar last season, there was banners everywhere and you name it. The aim, though, unfortunately, is to avoid relegation, and that's so hard for a club of Everton's history to possibly be in a third relegation battle on the spin. You know, this is a club that's iconic. Goodison is, you know, it's still unclear quite when the switch to the new stadium happens, so it could potentially be the final season at Goodison. We don't know. I think, you know, there may be some negotiations over that. But, you know, it's coming to the end of its life and no one wants to see Goodison go out with a whimper. They want to see it go out with a massive celebration and a bang. A cup run would be incredible. They've been few and far between, too few and far between. Against Burnley, against Sean Dyche in the last 16 of the League Cup. That'll be interesting. I think if Everton could get a Wembley trip, that would certainly feel like a step in the right direction. The league, though, as you know, it is where it's at, though, isn't it? It's the bread and butter for every single team in it. And, unless you're maybe like a Norwich that's quite happy bouncing up and down, which I think, that suits some people, doesn't it? Everton don't want to be in that again. It was too close last time. It was close the time before under Lampard. Last time was far too close. So I think not skirting with that would feel like an achievement, but it's going to be a long building process. And yeah, that's not what the fans want to hear, but it's going to take some time. So maybe a lovely mid-table mediocrity finish would feel like a real positive. And no stress.
Well, fingers crossed for Everton. A final question, really, Giulia, is about this new stadium. And of course, new stadiums cost a lot of money. And it's a case that we're probably going to have to look at a new stadium. Well, most definitely we will be looking at a new stadium. But the problem is whenever you build one of these things, it seems to have that detrimental effect on the pitch as well. And Everton aren't particularly in a very good place, unfortunately, at the moment. Likewise, if we started building a new stadium tomorrow, I'd be very, very worried about that money then being channeled out to building the stadium and therefore having a negative effect on the pitch. But I guess that's firstly one part of why it's been a struggle. But secondly, how long is that struggle going to go on for?
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on around the stadium now about sponsorship deals and the way it will be run inside. It's going to be a sort of a 7-day-a-week operation there. There's going to be restaurants in it that will be match day restaurants, but also there will be restaurants anyway. So it's another way of galvanizing cash, isn't it? It's much bigger, 52,000. Goodison gets just about 39,000 in it, full house, which is always full. Even when it's been awful, you can still never get a ticket. So, I mean, that just goes to show the fan base and the need is there. There's a season ticket waiting list. So, it should help. But as you said, it's a financial commitment to build a stadium because it's so expensive. And, since Brexit as well, all, things like that, this is way beyond my sort of knowledge and capability to talk about building materials. But even that, has been impacted as well, hasn't it? It will look incredible. It looks fantastic where it is. For anyone who doesn't know, in fact, that behind me is one of the early sketches from what it's going to look like. So it's on the dock. And it will look like it's coming out the water. They filled a dock in to do this, so it will look like it's sitting on the water, and there's a big glass side up there, where the water is and things, and there'll be the homestand, which is going to replicate, the Gladys Street now, the famous Gladys Street, will be one big wave. There won't be any sort of breaks in it, a big wave of home fans, which should create an incredible atmosphere, and they built it so it will still feel quite intimidating, and people will still be very close to the pitch, hopefully, because I don't like that in the newer stadiums. Or I went to West Ham's, and obviously it was the Olympic Stadium, wasn't it? So I went to see the Athletics there, which was great. But you're quite far away from the pitch, aren't you, if you go to a football game?
Yeah, it's just too far away, isn't it? It
loses that magic. But unfortunately now it's a business, and I hate saying that because I want football to be about hearts and souls and magic and all that, but it's not. It's a business, and it's a multi-billion-pound business. So you're probably in a similar situation where to get more cash in and get the big sponsors and get people interested and people wanting to invest, you've got to have a brand spanking new stadium that looks the part and gets more people in the door spending. But it's sad to see these homes go, isn't it? And then with that comes a financial commitment, and it will impact what you can spend on players or what's going on, in the club right now, because you've got to always have one eye on thinking, well, we've got to pay for that. And you don't want to go bang because of a brand new stadium. Liverpool have done it the opposite way. They've kept Anfield and bolted on sections to it, and that looks completely different now. It's huge now, is Anfield as well. So that was a different way. It's not really the way Goodison could be done. There wasn't really any capability for doing that because, it's literally in the middle of houses, isn't it? It's literally, there are people that live opposite the turnstiles. So it just was never going to be feasible to do that. Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? And you've seen it, Spurs did it, didn't they? Built a blinking brilliant stadium, but it hasn't really it hasn't replicated on the pitch, has it? It hasn't brought
it seems like, with them as well, it's kind of stopped and strangled what they've been able to do on the pitch.
Yeah, because it's a huge commitment, and it's you think building one of these big stadiums doesn't automatically equate to a Premier League title, does it?
No.
And it's not guaranteed success, but it is guaranteed, if you can get it right, to boost the bank balance. And then how that money is then spent is the next chore, isn't it? It just brings with it more money brings more problems, I think.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and I just get really sad seeing these iconic stadiums go. I think, I mean, Goodison's still got, where I sit, I've still got a wooden seat.
Yeah,
a wooden
exactly.
seat. But I mean, it's not the comfiest, so I'll be happy to have a comfier seat.
Yeah. Well, what's going to happen with Goodison Park once the new stadium is ready?
Yeah, this is really interesting, this one. It's in L4, which is one of the UK's most deprived postcodes, is L4. And Everton the Community, which is the charity with Everton, does incredible work right across Merseyside, supporting communities that wouldn't necessarily get much support in the pandemic. I mean, they gave out hundreds of thousands of food parcels and, made sure people had enough, to pay their gas bills. And if they needed internet, they helped them with that. It does exceptional work. And it was felt in the club. There's a big responsibility in L4. It's not too far away where they're moving. You could walk it, but it is coming out of a community that has relied on Everton being a club there. I mean, people will walk up and knock on the door literally on a Tuesday morning and say, I'm struggling, I need some help. And there's all different things around there. There's the People's Place, which has sort of, free legal advice. It has childcare options. It has, you name it, it's got it in there. There is, a food market there that, you pay, I think it's £3 or £4 or something. You get a big bag of food and stuff. So there's like a food bank there, and there's all sorts that goes on. What will happen with Goodison is it will be taken down. They're going to keep some of the pitch, the centre circle and stuff will be like a community garden. So that'll be lovely.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a mental health facility built there that will be free access for the community. So it's not really coming out, but Goodison will go, but the club won't leave the area. They're not going to leave it destitute. So I think a lot of people would have probably sold it off for a ton of houses. That's not going to happen. There will be some housing on there and commercial stuff, but there's also a huge part of the community and a big responsibility, and everything's staying. So the Dixie Dean statue will stay. Yeah. The Holy Trinity statue that's the other side near the Gladys Street will all stay, all the bricks. So yeah, Everton will still be part of there, but there'll just be no Goodison Park.
It's a lovely story, actually. That Everton will still be there, regardless of playing at Bramley Moore. It's Bramley Dock, isn't it? Bramley Moore Dock?
Bramley Moore Dock, yeah.
Yes,
I don't know what it's going to be called, the stadium. We just all call it Bramley Moore Dock at the minute, whether or not it'll have some all singing, all dancing name, Pepsi Stadium, who knows?
But no, it's lovely to think, because a lot of these clubs sell the stadiums and then just build on them, raking a whole ton of cash, whereas Everton, it's more about still being there. Yeah,
definitely. And it's a community that needs Everton to be there, definitely. And they're not going to leave it. All the stuff's there, all the other community buildings. There's an Everton free school that's next to Goodison that's there, that stays. I mean, I don't know if anyone watching this will want to, but if you did want to look up Everton in the community and see what's going on, you can look on their website, and there's more than 60 projects in that area that they fund. They've bought houses to help children when they come out of the care system at 16 but don't have anywhere to go, so they can house them. Yeah, you name it, they think of it. They do a really good job. So yeah, it's lovely that Goodison will still play a huge role in the community, and I think it's so important, because L4 is a community that needs every little bit of support that it can get. So yeah, it'd be lovely to see what happens with it. And I think the community garden's a nice way of presenting. There won't be a lot of things, though. If anything's not nailed down in Goodison, I was going to say, actually, even if it is nailed down, I think people will be taking anything they can, because, people are just, there's families that say, people say to me, they get quite emotional. My granddad used to bring me, and he's no longer here. And that was his seat. And, there's all these stories that have been going to this stadium for, like over 100 years. And these families that, no matter what, Everton has been there for them. you know, in lots of different capacities, not just the football capacity. It's been there and supported them. And, you know, it will be there'll be a lot of tears that day when they go. And I think there'll be a lot of people wanting to take things. I imagine there'll probably be an auction of a lot of things. Yeah, but it'll be a sad day. And I think it's a sad day for football when we see iconic stadiums go.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. And it'll be nice for the fans to actually be able to have those mementos of such a great stadium, a stadium that's played, you know, part in league titles, in European championships as well. I believe even the World Cup, wasn't there some games at Goodison during the 1966 World Cup?
Yeah, Eusebio's played there, and he said it was the best stadium he'd ever played at. Yeah, it was a World Cup stadium. The Bramley Moore Dock one, although it's not finished yet, is part of the Euro 2028 bid as well. So that'll be exciting. So it'll create its own history, will the new side. But I think everyone just wants to get in there in the Premier League for a start. And be building on something and see sort of, you know, a trophy come in, you know, a League Cup. I know some people do the League Cup down. It's a trophy. You get to go to Wembley and you get to have a great day out. And Everton that would be such a step forward for Everton. It would seem like there is some return to, you know, the successful times, you know, when it was Sharpie and Peter Reid and all these great players that have graced the Goodison Park pitch. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I'm hoping Burnley don't go and tonk their old manager, but we'll see. I think Dyche will be on it. He'll be on it.
Yeah, he'll know exactly how they have got a completely different style themselves now, which isn't kind of working in the Premier League. But, Giulia, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and all the very, very best to Everton for the rest of the season.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure. Same to you. I hope you stay up and get it sorted. Fingers crossed for you.
And thank you everybody for joining us on this show. Please remember to hit the like, the subscribe, the bell button below to be alerted to any new videos we do here on Up the Cherries in all departments. Please do check out all of our interviews. We've got cherry picking as well. We'll have lots more videos during the international break as well. Rest assured, there's going to be lots of room for discussion over this period. But until the next show, Up the Cherries, thanks for joining us.